So this is a little introduction to Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. So just in terms of the historical background, I'd encourage you to check out Boulet's essay on the historical Chaucer in your book on page 473. It's really helpful to give you a sense of the time. But we're talking about English in England in the late 1300s, at a time when life was very short. The plague had just sort of ravished London. And in terms of culture, ever since the Norman conquest of 1066, when the French invaded England, French had been the literary language, and used by royalty, used by aristocrats, spoken by people in power. And so Chaucer's decision to write this poem in English, and our knowledge that it was very, very popular, are generally thought of to suggest that Chaucer is one of the people who helped shape the English language as we know it. Now, I know that reading it yourselves in the Middle English probably doesn't sound anything like English, and I'll try to read some of it and show you how to understand it. Also, there's translations available online. They're not very good. I don't suggest you just read it in translation. But it's not as different as it seems initially. If you hear it read in the pronunciation of Middle English, it's very different than ours, but what I'm going to try to do is read to you a little bit of it just phonetically, and you'll hear how it sounds like our modern English. One more thing I meant to mention is that the premise of the text is that there's a bunch of pilgrims, meaning people going on a pilgrimage, going to Canterbury, and that was a pilgrimage site. And one of the reasons Chaucer chooses this is because it's a very diverse group that he can create. So going on this trip, you have rich people, you have their servants, you have members of the clergy, a number of members of the clergy, and you sort of get to see all the different hierarchy of the church. And so what Chaucer wants is to create sort of a complete social universe, and this is a event that would have drawn people from various, or pulled together people from various social classes, and that's why he chooses this trip to Canterbury. So I'm just going to read you a little bit of the beginning, just very poorly, not in Old English, Middle English translation, sounding it out so that you can sort of hear how you might do it yourself, because when you hear it said, it sounds a lot more like our English than it looks like. When that April with his showers suit, the drought of March hath pursed to the root, and bathed every vein in such liquor, of which virtue engendered is the flower. When Zephyrus eke with his sweet breath inspired hath in every holt and heath the tender crops, and the young sun hath in the ram his half course run. And small fowls make melody, that sleepen all the night with open eye. So pricketh them nature in her courages, that longen folk to goon on pilgrimages, and palmers for to seeken strange strands, to fern halls, coth in sundry lawns, and specially from every shire's end of England to Canterbury they wend, the holy blissful martyr for to seek, that hem hath holpen when that they were seek. Okay, so that just maybe sounded a little bit like gibberish. I hope you heard some of the English in it. You have to struggle through it both by hearing your own voice say it, and also by looking at the notes, right? When that April with his showers suit is the way I would pronounce it phonetically from what's written, right? But when I look at the note next to the line, it says sweet showers. And then I can see how the word shoures, showers, sounds like our word showers, right? So we can start to see that they have a different spelling because their language is much more influenced by French than ours, but it's related. The drought of March hath pursed to the root. Now, none of those words are spelled the same way, but I think you can hear exactly what it said, right? The dryness of March hath pierced to the root, and bathed every vein in switch liquor. Now I see from the note that means such moisture, and that makes sense to me. Of which virtue engendered is the flower. Now, I can understand that even without the note, meaning, the flower came from the richness of the moisture. It's poetic, right? But sometimes the notes will just explain to you like a word that you don't know, and sometimes they'll sort of explain the poetry. So here it says, by power of which engendered is the flower. When Zephyrus eke with his sweet breath is the way they spell it, but I can tell that's breath. When Zephyr, the west wind, with his sweet breath, inspired hath in every holt and heath. And inspired, they're saying, means breathed into. That makes sense to me. That's the poetry. In every holt and heath, the gloss says, means wood and heath. That also makes sense to me. The tender crops and the young sun. So the tender crops, what does that sound like? Crops, right? You understand what that means. The gloss is sprouts, but you don't even need that gloss. And the young sun. What do you think that sounds like? The young sun, right? So it's an image of rebirth, right? Okay. And small fowls making melody, small birds singing, that sleeping all the night with open eye, right? They don't write silent E's the way we do, so you have to look at the note for that. So pricketh them nature in her courages. Now there's a long note. It says number 2. Nature so spurs them in their hearts, right? So if it's something really hard or long, they'll give you a gloss of the line at the bottom. That longing folk to gon on pilgrimages. I said this line wrong the first time, but that's okay. You can see that I struggle with it too. That longing folk to gon on pilgrimages. The people long to go on pilgrimages. So it's an image of when the spring is reborn, people want to be reborn spiritually, which makes sense to us. To fern halls, coth in sundry lawns. Now, I don't understand what any of that means, but I look and I see that most of those are Middle English words. To far-off shrines, known in sundry lawns. And then sundry lawns starts to make sense to me. I bet that means many lands. Sundry means many, and lawns, I'm thinking, means lands here. And especially from every shire's end of England to Canterbury they wend. Now, I don't have a gloss on wend, but it sounds like went. And I think I can tell that even if it's not, doesn't mean went, it means something like it from the rest of the sentence. The holy blissful martyr for to seek that hem hath holpen when that they were seek. Now I see from the gloss that means that them that helped when they were sick. So when you read it aloud, it almost sounds like English with a strong accent, which is kind of what it is. I just wanted to go through that for you so you could see how a person who, this is not my specialty either, and you could see how you can get through it. It's hard, which is why we're not reading a lot of it, but it's actually really fun. Think of yourself as kind of like a detective of it. So some things I wanted to point out throughout is that there's a concern for attire. So you see on line 40 and 41, Chaucer says that he's going to tell his readers which they were in and of what degree, and eke in what array that they were in. So he's going to say what what class were these characters from, and what kind of attire were they in? And I want you to think about, and we'll talk about in the discussion today, what the relationship between attire is and social class. Because again and again, Chaucer points out that the correlation between outsides and insides. I'd like you to look specifically at the religious characters. Definitely read the notes so that you know who they are. But a number of them are rather hypocritical. And we'll talk in the discussion about the one who isn't. Another thing that Chaucer is very keen to describe is sort of physical grossness. There's a lot of what we would call like toilet humor in this book, which I think makes it pretty funny, especially because you don't expect to read something old. And one of the things that's exciting about this is it shows us that the people who lived at this time were sort of just as bawdy as we are today. So like I said, look at the church officials. And then the last thing I want to point out about the general prologue is that Chaucer makes a point to tell his readers that it's going to be in the common language. So he's not going to change the language of the speakers of the poem, because basically the premise is that they're all going to Canterbury and they're going to tell each other stories to entertain themselves on the way. And he's not going to change their speech because he has a commitment to realist language. So I'm just going to read the claim that he makes, where he says, reader, don't judge me for using their real language. And it's on page 20, line 725. So he says, I'm going to tell you now about, the pilgrimage. But first I pray you of your courtesy that ye narrate it not my villainy, though that I plainly speak in this matter, to tell you her words and her cheer. Ne though I speak her words properly, for this ye knowen all so well as I, whoso shall tell a tale after a man, he mote rehearse as nigh as ever he can, everich a word, if it be in his charge, all speak he never so rudicle and large, or else he moot tell his tale untrue, or feign thing or find words new. He may not spare, although he were his brother, he moot as well see a word as another. Christ has spake himself full broad in holy writ, and well ye wot no villainy is it. Eke Plato seeth, whoso can him read, the words mote be cozen to the deed. Also I pray yow to forave it to me, all have I not set folk in her degree. Here is this tale, as that they should stand. My writ is short, ye may well understand. Now, that was probably one of the worst old Middle English readings you'll ever hear, but I was trying to emphasize the relationship between the words and our language, and I just want to go through and gloss it for you. So he says, it's line 725, I pray you of your courtesy. So give me your courtesy. Give me courtesy enough that ye narrate it not my villainy. The n/narrate is a vestige of the French language, where n is a contraction for a negative word that's put in front of another word to mean it doesn't happen. So he's basically saying that you don't blame it on my villainy, that I'm going to describe these people's words and their cheer, meaning their behavior, in the language they actually use. The know I speak his words properly. I'm copying the way he actually spoke. For this ye know as well as I. He's saying to his readers, I don't actually talk like this, but this is how he talks, right? And don't get mad at me for talking that way. It's not improper. And then he makes the claim that if you change someone's language, you tell a tale untrue. So you see that in line 735. Or else he might moot, which means might, tell his tale untrue. Or feign thing, or find words new. He may not spare, although he were his brother. He moot as well say one word as another. So he's making a claim that the realist language is important. And then he uses two important examples. So he says, Christ spake full broadly in the Holy Writ, meaning he copied people's true language. He didn't euphemize it for propriety, pardon me. And same with Plato. And so I'm just going to describe people the way they are. And, pardon me. One reason I think that's important is that it's a claim to authenticity. It's a claim to realism. And so I'd like you to think of this, this certainly isn't, realism is an anachronistic term in this time period. It's not like people had an idea of fantasy or realism. But I'd like you to think about the way Chaucer wants to sort of portray the real world. And then talking about the wife of Bath, people wrote a lot of good things about her on the blog, and I think we're going to talk about her in the Google Docs discussion this afternoon. But what I want to say is that she is, it's much debated, the quality of her feminism, because as people pointed out, it's sort of a strange feminism. She both says that she wants power and that women in general want power. That's sort of the moral of her story. But she also makes clear that she's fine getting that power through sexuality, which is something that we contemporary Americans often think of as antithetical to quote-unquote true feminism. I'm just going to read you a little bit of the beginning of her speech, very short. Experience, though none authority, which means authority, were in this world is right enough for me to speak of woe that is in marriage. For lords, since I was 12th year of age, thank be God that as etern on live, husbands at church door I've had 5. If I so often might have wedded be, and all were worthy men in her degree, but me was told, certain, not long ago, is that since that Christ ne went never but ones, meaning once, to wedding in the Cana of Galilee, that by the same ensample taught he me, that I ne should wedded be but once. Okay, so this is her whole beef in the beginning, and the prologue is almost more important than the tale. And what she's saying is that I've had 5 husbands at the church door. That's where marriages were executed. Sounds like a bad word, where they took place in this time. But basically what she's claiming is experience, not authority, is right enough for me, right? Christ says you should only be married once, but my experience tells me that that's not true. And that's a pretty bold claim she's taking on sort of the whole church in that moment. So think about that. And then you can see she takes great pleasure in mocking her husbands. And we'll talk about the husband, the final husband, who seems to have some quote-unquote power over her in our discussion later on. And then I guess I'd just like you to think about the sexual politics of it. I don't have an answer. But then her story is strange because you have a knight who rapes a woman and then is punished and ultimately comes to tell the women that he's supposed to make amends to that women want sovereignty. Sovereignty was kind of a big word at this time, meaning power over the self or the realm. But they also thought of God as being the sovereign, right? So it's sort of God and king are sort of in equal relationships, though, of course, the king is not really in the same relationship to his subjects as God is. God is the true sovereign. And so Allison, the wife of Bath, is making this pretty intense claim about women's rights or needs or desires. And then the fact that she's just one of the most, I mean, I didn't have you read the rest of it because it's so long, but she's one of the most interesting, sort of likable, funny characters in the book. She's one of the most, this is probably the most famous tale. So we'll talk about that more on the blog this afternoon. Thank you for listening. Once again, I'm so sorry that that your experience is being shortchanged. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that we remedy that with the second part of the class. But for now, watch these, and I will send out instructions on how to use the Google Doc in a little bit. Thank you.